Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. Today I am filming my April wrap up. So I had a pretty decent reading month in April, so there's nothing terrible. I don't think I had a 5-star, which is unfortunate, but they can't all be 5 stars. None of these books were terrible, so that's also like okay too. Let me get started on some stats. I read a total of 9 books. 0 of those 9 books were middle grade, so I didn't read any middle grade. I read 7 young adult books, and then I read 2 adult books. Of the 9, 6 of them were fantasy, 2 of them were mystery thriller, and 1 was like straight up romance. Of the 9 books, 4 were physically read that I own. 3 of those books were read on audiobook, and those were all borrowed from my library. And 2 of those 9 books were ebooks, 1 from Kindle Unlimited and 1 I borrowed from my library. So more specifically, 4 of those 9 books I own, 4 were borrowed from my library, and 1 was borrowed from Kindle Unlimited. My page count might be a little off since they were audiobooks, ebooks, and physical books, but it's approximately 4,043 pages read this month. I had 1 3-star read, 3 3.5-star reads. I had 1, 2, 3, 4. I had 4 4-star reads, and then I had 1 4.5-star reads. So my only 3-star read and the lowest book that I rated this past month was Bone Crier's Moon by Kathryn Purdy. This is a YA fantasy about these girls who are bone criers. These women ferry souls to the underworld or to their version of heaven. They are bone criers in training, so they haven't like completed like all the rituals required to do that. But one of the most important things that they have to do before they become like fully fledged bone criers is to kill their true love. One of our main characters at the beginning of the book is going to kill off her true love. Unfortunately for her, her true love is this hunter who's apparently been looking for bone criers and trying to kill them in revenge for some wrong that he has experienced. There's also another main character that's kind of woven in throughout the story. We have a little bit of a hate to love romance in this book. My biggest issue with this book was that there were so many plot lines that were going on, which is fine. Usually in a fantasy you have a lot of plot lines going on and they at some point kind of weave together pretty well. I didn't think that was happening here. I think there was so much going on. There were a lot of plot lines in regards to like the romance and then the best friend plot line, and then the mother, one of the characters' mothers might be like low-key evil, and then you have gods like meddling into the story. And for a YA novel that's like 300 maybe 400 pages max, like it felt so much, and then I didn't feel like they connected well at all. I didn't know like what plot line was like the most important, if that makes sense. But for the story I just couldn't tell like where I'm supposed to be focusing like my main attention on. The romance of it all was fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I think some parts were really well done, especially like the angstiness of this hate to love romance. I only really connected to one character, which again, I don't really have to love each character, but I didn't really care for any of them except for like one. I'm not the type of person who like has to love every single character to enjoy the book. I'm fine with like an unlikable character, though I don't think any of these characters are supposed to be incredibly unlikable, but none of them really interest me except for like the best friend character. I did like some of the fantasy aspects of this book, which is why I gave it 3 stars. In this world, these bone crier women are encouraged to kill 3 animals and take bones from each animal, and by taking those bones they absorb some of their talents. For example, I think there was one woman who killed a bear, and so she gets increased strength when she like has her like the bear bones with her, if that makes sense. Another character killed like a nighthawk, so now she has better vision at night when she has the bones of that nighthawk, and I thought that was really cool. That being said, there's animal deaths. I don't think it's cruelty, but I'm very sensitive to animal deaths in books, so that's something that's here if that bothers you. So I read a duology this month, and I'll talk about the duology as a whole, and that is 6 of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. I gave 6 of Crows 4 stars, and then I gave Crooked Kingdom 4.5 stars. I don't really feel the need to talk about the plot of the story. This duology is set in the Grishaverse, and it's like a heist story. I don't really have much to say on this story that hasn't already been said. Yes, I do think the writing is much better here than in the original Grishaverse. Leigh Bardugo obviously got better at her craft. Characters are very strong here. I will say that knowing that these books are like objectively better, for some reason I just connect more with the original Grisha trilogy than with this one. though I think these books definitely are like much better every reread. That's the vibe that I'm getting. So if I ever reread these, which I hope I do because the characters are amazing, I feel like they'll grow on me, and I'll probably even give this like 5 stars at a later date. But yeah, I just prefer the original Crier trilogy. I don't know why, it just connected with me more. I felt more invested in that one. I really love every single one of these characters. I know that some characters get a lot of flack, but I pretty much like all of them. For some reason Matthias gets a lot of hate. I don't understand why, but I like him a lot too. I just like all these characters. I think the characters are so strong. I would read any story about these characters in any setting because that's how well done they were, and they were very fully realized, and they were very distinct. The next book that I finished was a audiobook from my library, and that is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I gave this book 4 stars. This is a YA mystery thriller about a young woman or a young girl who, for her, I think, senior class project, is investigating a murder that occurred in her town some years ago. The official telling of the story is that a young man killed his girlfriend, hid her body, which was never found, and then he killed himself out of grief. But our main character doesn't think that actually happened. There's a lot of fishiness in regards to like the evidence that was left, and so she's pretty much investigating the story on her own, along with the help of the man who killed himself out of grief, or the young boy who killed himself out of grief. She's working with his brother in order to investigate this crime because she truly doesn't think that he had really anything to do with it. He was just kind of caught in the crossfire. So it's a really good detective story. I really enjoy mystery thrillers that are not from the point of view of like anyone within law enforcement. I don't really care to read from cops or detectives or whatever. That's just personal for me. And it's also very fast paced. This is a YA, so they typically go by faster. This book's been getting a lot of hype, and I can see why. It's pretty good. The reason I gave it 4 stars was it just didn't hit me like a 5-star read should. Like, it didn't give me that 5-star vibe, which isn't like a bad thing. 4 stars is still a good rating. So after that, I finished the audiobook for the Bromance book club by Lyssa K. Adams. This is an adult contemporary romance, also very popular. In this story, we follow a baseball player from, I want to say he's from Tennessee, and he's recently had some troubles with his wife, and they're separated. They're not divorced, but they're not really living together. And some of his friends within the baseball team and some other friends from around town convince him to join a book club where they read like these raunchy type of bodice ripper type romances in order to fix their relationship. The plot is very campy, but it does have a lot of strengths that even I, as a person who doesn't read a lot of just like straight contemporary romance, I really enjoyed. I think the thing that sets this story apart from others is that this romance is about a couple who is trying to fix their relationship. This isn't like the meet cute and then they fall in love type story. It's about falling in love again. It's about fixing what needs to be fixed. I also really appreciated that miscommunication was a part of the story, but it wasn't the miscommunication that we see in other romances. And I think we've all seen miscommunication in a romance where one of the characters hears something out of context and then they run with it and it ruins the relationship. I really hate that. But within this story, it's both of these, both of the people within the relationship are just not good at communicating their feelings, and that's what affects the relationship. And I think that's a lot more realistic, and I think that's a lot more believable in terms of miscommunication, as opposed to like someone listening to one thing out of context ruining a story and then they don't talk about it. This relationship has years of not talking about things. I gave this a 3.5 star because I personally didn't care for the sister character at all. The sister to the woman in this relationship, she's trying to be like a supportive sister, but it comes off really badly sometimes. I get wanting to protect your sister from like her shitty husband and like wanting to back her up, but there were so many times when talking to her sister and she was saying, look, I think he's gotten better, he's actually listening to me, he's much more supportive than he is, we're actually talking, and then her sister's like, nope, no, I won't believe it, he's terrible, he's awful. And I'm just kind of like, hey, like, I get supporting your sister and like having her back. I think your sister knows what she's getting into, and if she gets hurt again, then she gets hurt again, but at least that's like her decision, like no one's forcing her to. It also felt like the sister was like a huge negative entity within the relationship. Like I feel like the relationship was affected by the sister as opposed to like the sister just being like a supportive figure. And I like never want to see people having to choose between family and the relationship. And then another issue I had was that the wife character never really got any flack until like the last 30 minutes of the book. I understand that the husband character also had some things that he needed to work on in order to better their relationship, but from what I read, this was very much like we both had an issue in this relationship, or we both contributed to the problem. And throughout the entire book, like, the husband's getting like verbally crapped on, which is fine because he did do some wrong things, but I also think that the wife had a huge issue in it. Like, this issue in communication, it wasn't just like a one-sided thing. Like, the wife from the get-go, I could tell like she's not innocent either. And the fact that I had to sit through, like, I think this was like maybe 10 hours of audiobook, like the perfect wife who did nothing wrong in this specific relationship, I think it goes both ways. Like, the blame goes both ways. And the fact that we only acknowledge the wife's shortcomings until the end, I don't get to see her grow. It's more of like a instant kind of snap your fingers, oh, I see what I did wrong and I won't do that again type of growth, which isn't really growth. After that, I read This Savage Song by V.E. Schwab. This is actually the second book that I buddy read with Layla from Layla Reads, and I'll link her channel down below. But we buddy read this one as well as Bonecryer's Moon. This is also a very popular book. This is the first book in a duology, a YA duology, and this book takes place in a city called Verity. And in this city, when people commit crimes, they create monsters. Depending on the crime that you commit, you can create a different type of monster. And we follow two characters. We follow a monster named August, and he lives in like the southern part of the city. August's family, who basically runs the southern part of the city, is basically in charge of keeping monsters and people in line. It's kind of like this authoritarian military regime almost, in order to keep the people safe. And then we also follow another character named Kate, and her father basically is like a crime lord, and he's in charge of the northern part of the city. And it's all very like money hungry, kind of, everyone has like freedom, but it's also like kind of capitalistic almost. So the city's basically like fucked no matter like what perspective or what part of the city you're living in. The plot itself doesn't really reveal itself until maybe like halfway. I remember talking to Layla and we're kind of like, so what's like the overall plot of this book? Like, it was very entertaining, like the setting and the world building was like really interesting, but like we didn't understand what the plot was until like halfway through. So that's kind of like weird. I also didn't care for Kate, which is one of our main characters. The reason why I didn't like her is that one part of her story was trying to like live up to her family name. Her dad is a real tough guy. He's like essentially a crime lord, so she wants to be that tough girl. She wants to be treated and respected like her father, but at the same time she doesn't really have a relationship with her father, so I don't understand why she like idolizes him so much. And she's always like, you know, I don't call him by his first name because we never had that relationship, but at the same time she tries to act tough, you know, cutting class, smoking outside school, burning down churches or whatever. And like, I just didn't get it. And also kind of read to me like, I don't know if you ever read like fan fiction from like the Live Journal or fan fiction era, but that kind of tough girl character that was trying so hard to be tough, and it was just kind of like, I can tell that the reader or the writer of this fan fiction is like kind of young, and that's fine. Like, I don't mean that as shade, but like maybe it's kind of shady. I did, however, rate it higher than 3 stars because I do think August is like such an adorable character. I adore him so much. He's very much like that soft boy energy who just wants to do the right thing even though he's not in the right circumstances to do that, because he is technically a monster. But I didn't know going into this, because no one really ever talked about it, at least from what I saw, was that this takes place in a post-United States country. The United States kind of broke apart into different states, like different like country states, and that's pretty much the landscape of this story. So I thought that was really cool. I would have loved to see like a story more focused on that than like this, whatever this weird plot we have here going on. The creativity in this world and August and some of the other characters, like the minor characters too, are also kind of interesting. So that's why I gave it slightly higher than a 3.5. But Kate is just so obnoxious that I couldn't give this 4 stars because she genuinely like pissed me off sometimes. Like, I just didn't like reading from her at all. So after that, I read The King of Burning Skies by S.M. Gaither. I gave this like 3.5 stars. This book I borrowed from Kindle Unlimited. I feel like I've been talking about this series for like the past few videos in my channel, but that's just because I'm binging through it, so you'll see it a lot in my wrap-ups and my TBRs. This Kindle Unlimited series is, I think, YA, and it basically follows this young woman named Leigh, who's part of the Serpent Clan. In her world, there are many clans, like major clans, minor clans, and even lesser clans, and the Serpent Clan has basically been wiped out because they had pretty much begun like experimenting with the Serpent Clan's like inherent powers. Each clan has their own kind of magical abilities, but the Serpent Clan was really like playing with fire when it comes to their magic, and they got killed off. Leigh is obviously still alive, and there's a lot of prejudice against people who were part of the Serpent Clan, so Leigh hides that part of herself. There is also a like mad king emperor type character who is responsible for the death of Leigh's mother, as well as like some other like horrible heinous acts. So there's a little bit of a rebellion brewing with the help of some allies and even the emperor's own son. The first book wasn't my favorite. I think there was a lot of issues with the writing and the pacing and the story overall, but the second book got a bit better. I could actually understand these characters more. They weren't just names on the page for me. The story had a clear direction and a clear narrative, and I really appreciated that, because sometimes with these Kindle Unlimited stories, it's like they kind of feel similar because they don't have a clear narrative and they all kind of start to blur. But this one was a little bit more distinct. It motivated me to continue on with this series, and then like the follow-up series that takes place within the same universe. I know the author has another series, so I'm actually like motivated to continue. And in this book we also get more perspective, more POV chapters from the prince, the son of the like mad emperor character, so I really appreciated that. I do think that some characters were just really dumb though. Like from the get-go we could see that one of the allies was also kind of like acting really sus, and everyone was like basically like, this character is acting really sus, right? Like, what do we do about it? And like no one did anything about it. And at the end there was this like plot twist, and I saw it coming. I'm pretty sure the characters also saw it coming, and the fact that no one did anything or even tried to like prevent anything bad from happening, it's just like really like, why would you not do anything? These high fantasy series that I find on Kindle Unlimited are like really nice palate cleansers for me between like bigger chunkier books. I wouldn't necessarily say that these are like must reads for anyone, but I find them entertaining, and that's like all I look for in a book. So after that I listened to The Hollow of Fear by Sherry Thomas. This is the third book in the Lady Sherlock series. This is a historical mystery series that follows a young woman named Charlotte Holmes. In the first book, Charlotte Holmes has basically ruined her reputation by having a relationship, a out of marriage relationship with a man, so she's currently like shunned from society. But that's kind of what she wanted, because now she has all the free time in the world to solve mysteries, to work with Scotland Yard. In order to do this, she has to essentially use a pseudonym, and that is Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes is not a real character in this world, just a name that Charlotte uses in order to work with various people who would work with a man rather than working with a woman. This does take place in the Victorian era, so there's a lot of limitations for her and other women. I do think this author writes this era well and has it fully realized. I also find the series very funny, not in like there's a character who cracks a lot of jokes, but there's a lot of wit within this author's writing that I really appreciate, because most of the times when there is an author who writes a comedic character, I don't find that character funny. Maybe I just don't have a sense of humor, but I just don't find it funny. But I think this author writes a lot of wit within her books that isn't like, here's the setup for the joke and then here's the punchline. It's more subtle, which makes it more funny for me. I don't know, I find subtlety funnier than like setting up a joke, if that makes sense. The one thing about her stories, and it includes this third book as well, is that her mysteries are very, not necessarily far-fetched, but there's just so many details and so many characters, and there's also so many moving parts within the mysteries that like I kind of get confused, especially because I listen to this on audio. I don't have like something physical to look at, so when she references different characters that are at play in this mystery, I'm kind of confused because I for some reason need to see the actual name to like set characters apart, if that makes sense. That's just on me. I guess I get confused easily, I don't know. But yeah, that's why I gave this 4 stars. But it's still really good if you're into like historical fiction. It's also pretty interesting if you're into mysteries, and the narrator for the audiobook is also pretty good. I just I think she has a beautiful voice, so I don't, like, I love hearing her voice. That's weird, but it's true. And the last book I finished in the month of April was Rebel Angels by Libba Bray. Also a series that I've been talking about a lot because I've been binging the books, so they come up in my wrap-ups and my TBRs. But this trilogy is also a YA fantasy that takes place in the Victorian era, and we follow a young woman named Gemma Doyle, and Gemma Doyle has pretty much grown up in India for most of her life. She does eventually make the move to England with her father and her brother. Prior to her move, her mother passes away in pretty terrible circumstances, and Gemma's like a witness to the whole thing. And since her mother's death, she's been getting visions and nightmares, and weird things are happening. This story is essentially a portal fantasy. There's also like secret societies, witch covens, and just a lot of fantastical elements I really enjoyed. None of the characters are particularly likable. We have a core group of 4 friends that are there's issues with each one of these characters, and none of these 4 girls that appear in this book are like good girls, if that makes sense. But I do think that one thing that really unites these girls is that none of them, maybe with the exception of one, but I don't think any of them really care to cater to this idea of what a woman should be within this period, and that really unites them. And I think that's like the best part of the story. Without giving too much away, this whole story is essentially about these girls that escape to these portal worlds in order to like be themselves, and the fact that they have to go through these fantastical loops to avoid the shitty society that they've grown up in, I think is like so beautiful, but also super tragic. And that's kind of why I like this story. It's like escapism, not only for me reading the book, but also for these girls. This YA series is a little old. I want to say the first book was published in like 2003, 2005, but I still think it holds up pretty well. Libba Bray writes really great characters, and I think specifically, I think she writes really great journeys for these characters, or any characters, because I've read her Diviner series and I really like those books as well. This was a reread because I am eventually gonna finish up the series. I've read the first 2 books in the trilogy before, but I never finished it, so I'm rereading the series to like get like my full opinions on it. There were a few instances that I didn't really like, and it also didn't give me, again, this like 5-star vibe that I look for. Hopefully I'll get to the 3rd soon. So those are all the books that I read during the month of April. Please let me know if you've read any of these. Did you enjoy them? Did you not enjoy them? Are you interested in picking any of these up? I would just like to hear anything that you have to say in the comments down below. I will link all my social medias down below, as well as some more important links. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.